is Joey Svensson, the pastor with no answers, and I want to quickly welcome the following people who are a part of the Pastor with No Answers Patreon family, and that's Camden Perez, Ben Gary, Chris Abbott, and Paul Wheeler. Thank you guys for joining the crew. It's great interacting with y'all, and I appreciate the support. Anyone else that's interested in supporting this podcast in that capacity, you can go to pastorwithnoanswers.com and connect with us there. Hope you enjoy the show. All right, here with Jack Hoey, the Lesser. And Jack, I've got to tell people, I didn't create that nickname. That sounds like a real asshole move on my part to call you the Lesser, but that's your Twitter handle, man.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's
true.
Is that kind of like, do you say that with pride? Like, that's kind of your way of saying, I love my dad and he's greater than me.
Yes. And off the record, no, it's funny. When I started at Seacoast, my dad and I kind of started at the same time.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of issues. One, there were people who didn't know that there were two of us. There were people who only knew my dad, and didn't know that I existed. And then there were a few people that knew me but didn't know that my dad had the same name.
Right.
The other problem was that I'm not a junior. I'm the third. And so one of the things we ran into was people would call me Junior. And they'd say, oh, did you talk to Jack Jr.? And the people who knew my dad wouldn't know who they were. They might think they were talking about so it was just very confusing.
Yeah, totally.
And so I just, probably a few months after I started, I was like, just look, tell you what, let's just go with Jack the Greater, Jack the Lesser. And it is the only nickname that has ever stuck.
There you go. Our listeners will get a kick out of knowing. So your dad is pretty high up on the totem pole at Seacoast. He's most people's boss, and so there's definitely been a handful of times where I have emailed him thinking it was you, and I obviously, I can cut up with your dad, but I don't necessarily go guy talk with your dad, and so I've been like, oh, sorry, wrong Jack Hoey. And
well, I know that there was at least, I think this was a couple years ago, but I know there was at least one of these podcasts that was supposed to be me, but you emailed the wrong Jack.
Oh yeah.
And at that point I was like, well, he'd be just as good, frankly. So my dad was on there.
Yeah. And we actually, I've done a podcast description on iTunes, and I actually said Jack Hoey and in parentheses the father, and someone actually wrote me and said, hey man, don't you think you're going a little overboard? Like, why are you calling this guest the father?
That's how he always made us refer to him when I was growing up. Yeah.
But universally, for real.
Yeah. Well, it's funny to me, like whenever I talk to people, in the office, and they'll say, it's like, talking to your dad it can be intimidating. And I'm like, yeah, try being 6.
Exactly.
I really feel your pain.
There you go. So we've done this little segment with a handful of people now, and I have to put you and your dad in a category of people that if y'all and there's a good dozen or so. I'm sure probably the list goes beyond that. But if you were to ever be in a conversation with me and said, yeah, I don't believe anymore. I don't believe in God, don't believe in the biblical narrative or Jesus or anything, I would really be like, oh my gosh, like you or your dad. So no pressure. Don't lose your faith the ripple effect will just be unbelievable. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people. There's a lot of people depending on me. And
well, I gotta say, I gotta keep phoning it in. Then.
So how long have you? Pretty much your whole life you were brought up in a Christian household.
Yeah.
always been a believer sort of thing. Was there ever a time when you were just like, I'm going to make my parents' faith my own faith and like cross the line? And is there like a time when you say, this is when I really became a believer?
Well, so that's a couple of different questions. One, and this was a question that always got me in trouble when I was in college. I went to Liberty, and the Baptists hated this answer I'm about to give you. But so the kind of the question you asked, when were you saved? I have no idea.
Yeah, I love it.
Man, the Baptists hate that answer, especially that the do you know that you know that you know, and I'm like, right. I don't know why you keep asking that. And the reason I don't know is because I can't think of a time that I didn't believe the basics of the Christian faith. Like
right.
There's never been a time in my life where I didn't believe in God. There's never been a time in my life where I couldn't tell you that Jesus was God's son.
Yeah.
And so now there's part of that's like, oh, well, you were just a kid saying what your parents believed. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, as opposed to what? But I also knew that I really did believe it because I trusted my parents.
Right.
And, I've always found that to be a really absurd criticism to make of children. It's like, oh, you only believe because you trust your parents. It's like, that's not a bad thing. But so one, I don't know because I there's never been a time where I didn't believe that.
Right.
So yeah, I always kind of grew up believing those things. But then there was kind of a moment in high school. So went on a high school youth group trip and really experienced God in kind of a profound new way. And you could say that was sort of a moment when a lot of behavior changed, when I started living differently. But at the same time, I don't really think that the older I get, the less I am convinced that that was the moment that I became a Christian.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, I don't know when I was saved. I'm perfectly okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I've actually been told by other Christians that there's no way I can be a Christian if I don't know, but I simply don't know. Like, why is that such a big deal? I mean, it's crazy. Like you said something and I mean, I would love to know, do you mind delving into what you mean when you said that you experienced God at a camp?
Sure. Well, I'm not entirely sure so the way to describe it would be the idea that a lot of the kids in the youth group were sort of experienced a charismatic move of the Spirit.
Yeah.
Is the best way to describe it.
This is getting weird already.
And so, like tongues and prophecy and all this stuff. And now, the old, so here's, it's interesting, kind of like we've talked about in past episodes with miracles, right? On the one hand, the older I get, the more skeptical I am of my experience because I was 14, 15, I wanted to fit in and, things were happening.
Yeah.
On the other hand, again, that was kind of the moment when my life changed.
Right.
That there was definitely a moment where, and it's one of the things that, when I was older, and I would talk to my mom about it, she would say, yeah, that was, you came back from that trip and you were a completely different person. You were different to us. You were different to your brother and sister. And, so just a lot of things changed then. So it's sort of like, I don't really know if it was like a real experience or if it was just like emotion and getting caught up. I don't know anymore, but it also doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
To me, I used to really care, but not so much anymore.
Oh, goodness. So at this point in your life, do you think it's possible for you to not believe?
No.
And why is that? Just because that you're obstinate enough not to ever give in to that? I mean, because there's definitely there's people that I know that I would put them on the same playing field as you and and I'm like, oh my gosh, they don't believe anymore. So what is it about you that could make you confidently say, yeah, I'm not going to stop?
Well, now I say no immediately. There are things that could happen that could conceivably there are things that can happen that could conceivably, to my mind, like change things, right? Like a catastrophe involving family members, right? There are tragedies that can happen. There are all sorts of things that can happen, and I have no idea how I would react to those things.
Yeah.
And so I can't really say that though. There's no way that. There's no way. I know for a fact that nothing would ever convince me otherwise. People react to things in different ways. But that being said, I think, knowing myself, what is more likely in those circumstances. So let me put it this way. I think there is a 0% chance that I would never not believe, but I don't think there is a 0 chance that I would not walk away from the faith.
Huh. So saying, I'm pretty sure God is real, but I don't want to hang out with him anymore.
Yeah,
I'm
basically,
done
I
with
know
him.
you're real, and I hate you. I think
wow.
that is a conceivable scenario for me. Not to say likely, but a few months ago I talked with you and Jared and Scott, and I brought up the brothers Karamazov, I think.
Yeah.
And this idea, it's like the deal is that Ivan, one of the brothers, Ivan, he basically tells his brother Alyosha that he believes in God. And he just has decided to reject him. That is like the very, very paraphrastic version of that. So I believe in God, I believe in heaven, and I don't care.
Yeah.
I reject him because he is a monster, is sort of the deal. And that, I don't, in the Miracles podcast, I kind of talked about, I really do think I'm wired for faith. Because, I've tried to imagine what it would be like not to believe in God. When I was in college and sometimes others, I kind of have moments where it's like, what would that be like?
Yeah.
Do I think I could just decide that God doesn't exist? And to me, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And not in a, the clouds open, the sunbeams come down and singing starts. Right, but just like the proposition God does not exist is one that, to my mind, is inconceivable.
So more intellectually, what are you talking about, or
I wouldn't
because
even say intellectually? It's not about proofs. It's just for every part of who I am, God exists is the same self-evident truth as 2 + 2 being 4. But also the same self-evident truth that, like, a sunset is beautiful, right? Like, those are two different ways of knowing.
Yeah.
Right. Like, there's the intellectual way of knowing, which is proofs and logic. But there are also things that there are things that you know are true because you just know them.
Right.
Right. There's no proof I could give you that would convince you that I love my children.
Right.
But I do.
Right.
Right? Like, my love for my children is true in the same way as math is true.
Right.
But I can't prove it to you in the same way as I can prove math. And to me, God's existence is just true. It is as self-evidently true, and to me as obvious a part of reality as anything else that we can see with our eyes.
So do you think that, all right, let's say for a second here that God does not exist. Is it possible, because of cultural conditioning and just your brain evolving year after year after year, given the school that you went to, the things your parents told you, is it possible for you to be where you're at right now, being 100% convinced in God and him not existing? Like, in other words, is it possible, do you think, for you to be where you're at right now, being convinced, and in actuality, God doesn't exist?
Sure. I mean, sure. I mean, because, in the same way you can't really prove that, I can't prove that you exist or that I exist. And it's like sort of the deal of there are lots of things about reality that we can't know and that we can't prove.
Yeah.
So yes, it is entirely possible that I am wired in a way that I will never be able to know because it is so much a part of me, and be wrong.
Right. Right.
Sure.
How would you? So let's say super intellectual guy that you, or woman that you respect. I'm trying to be, kind to both genders. It may not be a guy. Maybe a woman. So listen to what happened to me today. I was talking to someone. I was actually on a podcast, and I used the word girl. And then I had to switch over to male, and I was like, shoot, if I say girl and then I say man, it's going to be really messed up. So I said girl and then boy, and it really sounded silly. Girl is a different word than boy. It just is. I don't know why. Like, I think girls and dudes, but boy, that just, so I mean, anyway, that just means that I'm a big time sexist, I think. So when it comes to, so if someone approached you and said, look, I don't believe, and I respect you as an intellect, you respect me, give me your best shot. Like, I really want to know. I'm not trying to debate with you. I really want to understand someone like you who I relate to. I like how you think. I like how you process. Why in the world do you believe in God? Like, give me a snapshot. Why?
So two things. So one thing that I kind of wanted to point out, because I got some flack after the Miracles episode.
You're still bothered by that flack,
and
man.
I think you and I are gonna have a chat with someone later this week.
Oh yeah.
And one point that I think he had an issue with was when I said in the Miracles episode that I think I'm wired for belief.
Right.
And the deal that I think it's possible to be wired in such a way that faith is easier for you, and I think some people are wired in a way that makes it harder.
Right.
So part of my answer is I believe because I really believe that in some sense I'm wired to believe.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I believe because of something that is out of my control, but I believe and I follow Christ because I choose to, and those seem contradictory, but they're not. In the same way as, it seems contradictory that God would be omnipotent and that we would have free will. But they aren't. It doesn't mean we understand how they aren't.
Yeah.
But one of the things we see over and over is that, God knows everything and we are responsible for our choices. And for me, I believe because I choose to follow Christ, every moment is a choice. And in every moment, I am communicating with my actions and my thoughts and my words what I believe about the nature of reality. And for me, in every moment, I want to more and more reflect an imitation of Christ. And so for me, I think that in some ways I'm wired to be drawn to God, and I choose to believe. And for me, the one thing, to my mind, the one thing that matters in terms of if this isn't true, then nothing matters. And if it is true, then it's really the only thing that matters. And that is that for me, I believe because I believe without a doubt that the resurrection of Jesus is a historical fact.
Yeah.
The resurrection is not, the bodily resurrection is not a morality tale. It is not, metaphor. It's not a lesson for us. Like the resurrection happened.
Yeah.
It happened within history. It was an historical event. And I believe that. And because I believe that, what other choice do I have?
Yeah. 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 It's like, well, I'm following that dude if he could do that. For sure.
Right.
Has there ever been a time in your life where you thought, uh-oh, I'm going down a path. This is gonna end up in me not believing?
No.
No.
No, I mean, there have been, I think I want to say this, because, not because I want to hold something back, but because I just want to be very clear in what I'm saying. Let me put it this way. I think you will know exactly what I'm talking about because we both work in a church.
Right.
Working in a church has more than anything else I've ever done made me have moments where I want to walk away. Not because I don't love Seacoast.
Right.
And not because I don't love God and not because I don't value what I do.
It's a battlefield, man.
It is just difficult.
Yeah. And
you encounter people, and I'm not talking about staff members. I just mean you're going to meet people. You're going to encounter people with real hurt and real questions, and you're also going to encounter Christians who are just extremely difficult people.
Yeah.
And just I think there are few things that are as frustrating to a person's faith as being a part of a church.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to explain it better than that. I love Seacoast, and I've been going to Seacoast since I was 11 years old.
Right.
But
that makes perfect sense.
It has been, there are just moments where it's like I just want to leave.
Yeah.
And again, that's I don't know. I feel like I'm just saying the same thing over. That's not a comment on the staff. That's just, and it could be spiritual attack.
Yeah.
It could just be bad days. But so it's not. And again, that's not a matter of belief. That's sort of kind of what I was saying earlier. It is inconceivable to me that I would ever not believe, but I could see the possibility of me saying, you know what, forget it. I'm done with this, Christianity thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm just leaving.
Yeah.
To me, that is conceivable.
Yeah.
Not to say likely, but conceivable.
Yeah. Totally. All right. Well, I want you to try to put your mind here and really think through how you would respond in this situation. But what, and it seems like maybe I asked you this before, but I can't remember. So if your dad sits you down, and for those of you that may be a new listener, Jack's dad, like we talked about, has been on this podcast before, and he just said, man, I don't necessarily want this to, be a bad conversation, but I just want to let you know that I've, one thing led to another, and I don't think I believe anymore. I care about people. I'm not going to go to church. I just don't believe in the Bible. How does that affect you? I know it affects you. I'm not asking that, but like, what does that do? I mean, would you even come close to being like, well, dadgum, I don't believe it either then?
That's probably one of those things where it's very difficult to know how I'd react. Yeah. But I think to some degree I would have the same. Again, to some degree, I would have the same response as whenever I read anyone who has, prominent or anyone with a blog who has those like, I did some research and I've decided that I don't believe anymore.
Right.
To me, it's just sort of like, okay, you're you,
right?
And I don't know what I can't understand fully the process you went through to get to that, but I guess let me put it this way. Whenever people say things like, I can't imagine a God who would do X,
right?
I just that stuff always drives me crazy because it's like, well, who cares what you can imagine?
Right.
Like, what does that have to do with anything?
Right.
That doesn't tell me anything about God. It tells me about you. It doesn't tell me about God. And it tells me important things about you, right? Like if you say, I can't imagine a God who would let children get cancer. Okay, that doesn't tell me anything about what God is like. That just tells me something about you.
Right.
And that tells me a good thing about you, that you feel empathy towards people who suffer. And that's good, but it doesn't tell me anything about God.
Right.
There's it's I mentioned math earlier. There are numbers. So I was terrible at a certain point. I was terrible at math in high school and college. Like, pre-cal, calculus, statistics wasn't too bad, but like the higher algebra and calculus and all that stuff, I could not penetrate my brain. I am not the Jack Hoey you want for math. That is my dad. But it's not like pre-cal stopped being true just because I sucked at it.
Yeah.
It's like there are numbers that are so big I can't imagine. Math doesn't care.
Right.
Math isn't like, wow, gosh, Jack has a hard time with this. Maybe I'm the problem. Like, math doesn't care what I think. Math is math. The numbers are true or they're not. And in a sense, God's the same way. It's like, I can't imagine a God who would do X. Who cares what you can imagine? God is who he is, regardless of what you think and regardless of what you can imagine. And so when there's always a part of me when I read people, it's like, I couldn't believe in God anymore. I just don't care.
Yeah.
In the sense of it doesn't really rock my world because my faith isn't dependent on theirs.
Right.
And what I believe isn't dependent on whether they can believe.
Yeah.
Again, I believe because to me it is an obvious part of reality, but I also believe because I choose to believe.
Right.
I mean, every day I really try to see that as this is a choice I am making to be a Christian, right? I believe, and I don't think I could not believe, but it is also a choice I make every day to live into that reality.
Yeah.
And to not take it for granted.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
So the short version, how would it affect you if your dad stopped believing? Jack says, I don't care. No, I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, so where, I think the only thing that I hesitate with that, because I agree with you, I don't like, that's not as natural of a thought for me as it is for you, but
Sure.
How do you have that mindset, but also value the feelings that God has made us to be able to have? So in other words, when someone says, I just can't serve a God who would allow kids to get cancer, I don't think those feelings should be discounted altogether.
No, not at all.
So how do you hold both of them in your hand? How does someone process through that thought and yet still recognize their place in life and their place is not God?
Yeah. Well, so like I said, when you say that the things that make us angry or sad are just as much clues about the way that we're made as the things that make us happy and inspired and all the whatever good emotions or however you want to say it. and the deal is that if you believe that God made us in his image, and if you believe that he made everyone, what that means is that everyone reflects God in different ways. And so every single person who has ever lived, whoever lives now, every single person reflects something different about who God is. Now, because of sin, we're all, a little bit cracked, a little bit broken, a little bit twisted. And so one of the challenges is to sift through which parts of us accurately reflect who God is and which parts of us are kind of like a little bit broken, right? And need to be corrected and like a broken bone needs to be set so they can grow properly again.
Yeah.
But every single person reflects something, something unique about God. And these things all overlap, right? It's not like, everyone reflects this totally unique, totally different, universal, enormous truth about God. There are lots of overlaps.
Right.
But what it means is that every person you meet has something to teach you about who God is that you don't know.
Yeah.
And those things are important and they're worth paying attention to. But sometimes feelings are wrong, right? Sometimes we feel betrayed because we don't know the whole story.
Yeah.
And sometimes we feel angry when we're the one to blame. And sometimes we feel sad when we shouldn't.
Right.
Sometimes we feel happy when we shouldn't. But sometimes we feel sad because we should. And again, those things reflect something about us, and you should never ignore that. But yeah, so pay attention to those things and learn from them. But they do teach you about God, and they're not, worth ignoring.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So, I guess we'll wrap it up right there. Before we go, can you just prove God to everyone? All right, cool, man. Whatever.
Sorry.
Your faith is really strong.
No, sorry. I was just getting distracted there.
Whatever, man.
No, I can't.
Whatever, man. Whatever.
You know what? You were a mean person, and that's really what people need to know.
Hey, man, I believe too. I'm just dependent. I'm dependent on you.
See, that's the deal. Like, if Joey, if you came to me and was like, I don't believe anymore, I was like, see, now I know it's true. It's all true.
What, Joey? Thank you so much, man. You have bolstered my faith. This has been the most unbelievable thing to ever.
Right.
Like, so that means right now I'm the biggest obstacle of your faith. You're like, gosh, I just don't know if I can believe something Joey believes.
Wow, I don't know if I've ever thought about it like that. No, let me put it like this. So no, I can't prove that God exists. Like, I can't, and just like you can't prove He doesn't exist. But at the same time, so here's the deal: you can't prove to me that you love Priscilla, and I can't prove to you that I love Laura, my wife. Right? You can't prove that. But what you can do is, over time, you can demonstrate through your life and actions and words a case that is overwhelming.
Yeah.
But that takes time and takes commitment. And at some point, after Laura and I, or you and Priscilla, when that relationship stretches into decades, and you have you have a lifetime of evidence, right? A person would be hard pressed to say, I can't believe that they love each other.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you saw one of those couples that was like, it's their 70th anniversary and they're 90 years old and they've been married since Hitler was alive, like one of those couples, and someone's like, I don't know, I think they're just phoning it in. Right. You'd be like, oh, shut up, you're an idiot. and so that's why, to me, it is vitally important that I affirm not just that to me it's natural to believe, but that it's a choice. Every day is a choice. I believe I don't have to act on my beliefs, but I choose to, and I choose to commit myself to Christ and to His people.
Yeah.
Right. I choose to commit myself to His people. There was a saying in the early church that He cannot have God as a father who does not have the church as His mother. Yeah. And it was this idea that you can't be a Christian and not be a part of the church.
Yeah.
You can't. That was inconceivable to the early Christians. This idea that you could be sort of a loner Christian was just not a thing. And so for me, no, I can't prove God exists to you, but I would hope that the longer I follow Him, the more that my life would be full of evidence that you, not you, Joey, but generally you, would have a harder and harder time denying. That is what I would say.
Yep. Awesome. And Jack Hoey, folks, and be blessed. Jack, do you want people to be blessed?
No.
Awesome.
No.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. All right. It's the Pastor with No Answers. Why do you still believe? Jack Hoey, thank you very much.